Good morning. We need to talk, all of us, and we need to talk about the role of researchers in the governance of AI. And when you think about the role of researchers, maybe you think of your next paper or your next panel, but we need to talk about a very different role, because researchers are, in the new digital framework and in many new initiatives, part of the governance and enforcement of AI regulations. I cite from a report of the UN Advisory Board for AI about their vision for a future of governance, a vision where civil society, including academia and independent scientists, would play key roles in building evidence for policy, assessing impact, and holding key actors to account during implementation. And this idea of researchers as key stakeholders in AI governance has also made its way into the digital framework here in Europe. Take the DSA. Researchers play now an important role as fact-checkers to identify systemic risks on platform and supply regulators with necessary evidence, help with the auditing of auditing reports, and they get access to data, but only to research the specific systemic risks that the law outlines. The European Media Freedom Act wants academics to regulate and monitor media markets for signs of media concentrations and lack of pluralism. The political advertising regulation calls on us in our specific role to support free and fair elections or referendums and fair electoral campaigns. And the AI Act assigns us a whole bunch of roles as actively supporting the AI office, help auditing AI systems, including generative AI, develop codes of conduct, but also provide a counterweight to commercially driven innovation and develop AI solutions that are, and I quote, socially relevant and environmentally beneficial. And the law names then a number of criteria, what else this research has to live up to. So in other words, researchers in academia, in private companies, in civil societies have a host of new roles, and they are integrated as important clogs and wheels in the AI governance machine. Which makes sense, because these are complex topics and we need diverse expertise and evidence, so that is a good thing. It also makes sense because of the immense information asymmetries in this market. And yet, few of these policy proposals actually discuss what that really means and what is needed for academics to play and researchers to play that role. How that role fits this other role of independent academic whose performance is still measured by the number of papers and panels they speak on. Or how researchers should be positioned within the larger force field between regulators and very large tech companies. And to kick off this discussion is exactly the goal of today's panel. And we have invited perspectives from research, civil society, regulation, and industry. And I'm very, very happy that you four agreed to talk about, because you're exactly the ones I wanted to have this conversation with. Let me briefly introduce the panel. Oana, you are a tenured researcher at the French National Center for Scientific Research and a member of INRIA, the CEDA team. And you do a lot of research also with policymakers into the risks of humans, and, of digital technologies for humans and society, with a special focus also on advertising technology and disinformation. You won countless prizes. It's a really long list. Loveless Babbage Award for French Science Academy, and also a recent ERC grant, so congratulations to that, and many more rewards. Honorable mentions, so thank you so much for coming all the way to be here. Saskia Lensing works at TNO and is an LLM and LLP specialist. You are very interested in promoting innovation and applying natural language processing solutions in a wide area of fields, and you are leading the development of the Dutch large language model, GPT.NL, and you're also involved in a number of other European LLM initiatives that you will tell us about in a moment. Matthias is the co-founder and executive director of Algorithm Watch, and if I'm not mistaken, you have recently been named one of the 15 people in Germany to follow on issues around algorithm and civil society and rights. Algorithm Watch, for those who do not know it yet, is a human rights organization that wants algorithms and AI to strengthen justice, democracy, and sustainability instead of threatening them. And you do also a lot of research, together with research and also within AlgoSoc. And you have been also very active in advocating what is now Article 40 of the DSA, the access provision. And then we have Sven Schade. You are dedicated to the evolution of public governance, co-creation and regulatory learning. And you're very interested also in your research in human-centric and public service innovation, policy, and the update of emerging technologies. And since 2013, you are, so a very long time already, you're working as a science officer for the European Commission, where you lead the scientific work on digital governance and public service innovation. So a warm welcome to the panel. What I would like now to do is first very briefly give the panel the opportunity to introduce themselves, their relationship to this topic, and any first reflections that you would like to share. And then we continue with a number of questions. And of course, we are also really interested what you think and reflect and have to bring in. So we also keep some time for Q&A. So, Oana, can I start with you? Maybe,
yes.
What are your stakes in this game?
Of course. So, I'm a computer scientist, and I'm a security and privacy researcher. And my story related to the role of researchers in AI and online platforms starts in 2010, when I decided that I want to work on privacy risks in online platforms. At that point, no one thought that this is a good field, and my papers kept getting rejected. So I've been trying to look at risks with online advertising, online platforms for the past, since 2010, from a technical perspective. And it has been a field that was hard because we missed data. There was a huge data imbalance from what we can see as external researchers, what we can do from outside, and what platforms have. So the biggest difficulty in our research was how do we find crazy measurement methodologies that we can test a hypothesis, we can see whether the transparency mechanisms of online platforms are complete. We want to see whether the ad libraries contain all the political ads. So we always had this small researcher trying to understand the risks from the outside. So we had a lot of technical problems that hopefully will be fixed to a certain extent with the Digital Services Act and with this new ease of getting data from online platforms. Then as a computer scientist, my role, how do I see my role? I thought in the terms of we work with data, so we feel like we can provide evidence. This is everything. We can provide evidence that it's able to support policy. And the little anecdote I had here is that in, I think it was before the pandemic, 2019 maybe, it was, someone told me, go to CPDP, you will find it interesting. And I said, okay, then let me go to CPDP. And I was working on political advertising. I was we had this paper where we showed that the political ad library that Facebook put in place was missing half of the political ads in Brazil in 2018. And I wanted to discuss with legal scholars about what are the legal, I didn't know anything about law, but I wanted to know what are the laws around these elections and political ads. Is it and here I met a bunch of very interesting people that they said, okay, but there is the Digital Services Act. What do you want in the Digital Services Act? And all of a sudden, as a privacy and security researcher, I was a bit shocked. Oh, can I say what I want? Because until now, my state of mind was, oh, there is a problem here, there is a problem here, there is a problem here, but it was not, oh, what is the solution? What do you want? What do you need? And this is how we ended up doing a statement that where we are asking ad libraries that contain all the ads so we can better audit online platforms. So this was the short entry in this research.
Thank you so much. Matthias.
Yeah, so that was a perfect cue because I appreciate it when researchers radicalize and say, we need to ask for what we want and sign statements, because it still happens often that we get the reaction as a civil society organization, we can't sign that open letter, we are independent researchers. And I think this should be something of the past. But how did we get there? Well, at Algorithm Watch, we were always very trying to be very balanced in the sense that platforms, very large online platforms as they are called now, and very large online search engines, they do provide enormous benefits to society. And this is probably a strange statement for someone to say from a civil society perspective, but when we look at, for example, freedom of speech issues, of all the conversations that can take place there, it's sometimes a mistake to, for example, also only look at very liberal and rule of law countries where, for example, you can get the idea that this is all problematic, that you have all this hate speech and this disinfo on this. And you forget about the fact that in many countries of this world, these platforms are basically the only channel for any kind of independent information and dissemination of information. So having said this, of course, we think that they have enormous problematic consequences at the same time, because having the public debate being structured by private companies is something that is in itself problematic. And it is different from, for example, publishing companies, because the whole model of one-to-many is different from the many-to-many of the platforms, and then the algorithmic curation that is taking place there. Why am I making this sort of so complex and so broad? Because in the end, we had to come up with an idea of what to do about it in this DSA that was proposed. There was this platform law proposed, and what would be a good idea to insert in this from this civil society perspective. And as Natalie said, we are trying to work a lot with researchers. I mean, we are researchers ourselves, but at the same time, we are a small organization. We can't cover all these different issues, and of course not with the experience and expertise that, for example, people at universities and research centers have. So we have from the outset always collaborated closely with universities and research centers to do what we call evidence-based advocacy. So we try to gather a lot of evidence, but then our role is to build advocacy positions on this, policy demands. What do we expect the legislator to do? This is usually the step then when academics are a little more reserved and say this is not our role, and that is totally fine, but this collaboration for us has worked well. And this outcome was that we said, we need more access to data, exactly how you described it. If we don't know what is going on, and if we can only scrape your platform from the outside and risk being sued for it, because scraping, the platforms say is against their terms of service and it may even be illegal and so on and so forth, then we really don't have any tool at our disposal to change this. So we advocated for this data access request, and it became the law, and it says, and that was also a hard fight, that civil society is also eligible if they meet certain requirements. So it's not only academic researchers, it's also civil society. We wanted journalists to be in there as well. We were not successful with that. reasons by the Commission were, for example, that it's very hard to find out what interests they have and are there commercial interests and so on and so forth. But at least, you know, civil society organizations and academic organizations are in there. And this is what we are trying to use now. We are maybe the first organization, at least one of the first organizations that actually launched a data access request under the DSA, because it came into effect on February 17 of this year. That was a Saturday. We still sent it out on Saturday, and we got a reaction by the German DSC on Monday. You know, I mean, they were not the DSC then because Germany was a little behind with, you know, making their own law that needs to transform the DSA, translate the DSA into German law. But we are in close contact with them since then. And also with the Irish colleagues, because we are asking for data from Microsoft, because we did an experiment with Copilot in the fall of 2023, and what we found out is that they basically put out the system outputs about 30% of false, misleading information when we ask it election-related questions. So the data access request is about getting more information about this to be able to analyze this. And you know, I don't want to be too long, but this is how we work. And if we ever get the data, you know, we'll probably also then again ask colleagues to analyze it with us, because you said, Juana, we need to devise crazy methodologies to come up with interesting findings, and that is also one of the challenges that we are facing.
Thank you very much. Sven?
Go here. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Indeed, I'm Sven, as introduced before, and I'm working for the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. You could see this as an equivalent of a ministry in your country. However, we are not a policy ministry. We are basically the in-house scientific support for policy making. And I'm part of a unit in the Directorate for Digital Transformation and Data. And our unit is a digital economy unit, and we are looking a lot into the impact of digital policies on society, on industry, and also on research. So in this role, we used to be really the unit supporting a lot of the digital policies. So the Data Act, the DSA, the DMA, the AI Act, the Interoperable Europe Act, and many more. And 1.5 years ago, actually, we split. The AI part became so big that there is now a second unit running also the European Center for Algorithmic Transparency, that is basically then providing more capacity to deal with the AI-related issues in particular. And at the same time, we created a structure across JRC to actually work in our different directorates and different units on trustworthy AI. And now we have a leadership team in this kind of setup where we have people working on algorithmic transparency, we have colleagues working more on cybersecurity, text on data mining and the IT part, on AI and science, and also on the role of public administration, which is then basically the field that I'm mainly working on. So I'm coming really from this perspective of digital policies and what does it mean for governments and public administration, which also includes now the roles for monitoring and enforcement. So in this setup, because we do have this capacity as a JRC, we have a lot of colleagues which are usually postdocs or senior researchers, but also there we do have this interface with the direct policymakers in DG Connect, in Digit, in DG Grow, etc., etc. We are also working with member states, but of course we also rely on a big network with scientific organizations and research centers, civil society organizations to actually carry on our work and ensure these translations sometimes from research into policy and policy support. And in this role, we now see really this shift of supporting a lot of policy in the shaping and during negotiations. But now a lot of the digital policies, like the AI Act, are adopted and they are out there. So now actually we see this gradual shift to support the implementation, but also support compliance assurance. And now we're really at this stage where also we have to understand which partnerships we need with research, which kind of roles should we take, which kind of roles should academic researchers take, and other parts of the ecosystem. And I'm very much looking forward to discuss some of these aspects today.
Thank you very much. Saskia.
Hi, I'm Saskia Lensing. I don't really work at industry, but at a research and technology organization, TNO. which works a lot with industry. So we're kind of in the middle of that. So we're bridging the gap between academia and industry, and also work a lot with governments at the moment. So we're very similar to the FKI or Fraunhofer or IMEC, as most of you might be familiar with. And indeed, we're currently working on developing our own Dutch language model, a sovereign, open, transparent large language model, and we're running into all kinds of issues and challenges, not necessarily related to the tech, but related to the legal boundaries, the legal challenges, the ethical questions that we have. And this is why we also found it so very interesting, because also looking around here, there's not that many developers. I've spotted one linguist. Good to see you. But indeed, the communities don't really mingle as much as should be and could be beneficial. As when you walk around at an AI developers conference, there's maybe one lawyer that's lost or one privacy officer that really wants to go away. So this is also something to put on the table and perhaps discuss a little bit about. But first, to kind of tie into all the other things that have been said and the interesting points that have been made. Yeah, it is very important that we get access to data, to algorithms, etc., from the big tech companies to kind of understand what's going on and to be able to supervise and check and evaluate it. And at the same time, it's also challenging because suppose Microsoft comes here and gives you this floppy disk, well, probably not just floppy disks, with all their data, then you will need a very, very serious infrastructure to be able to analyze all that data because it is massive and massive and massive amounts of data. So it is really, really challenging to, even if you had access to actually study it. So we really need to focus as well on developing methodologies to be able to deal with large amounts of data. We should not underestimate that. It's not as easy as to get the data on your servers and then just go ahead. And at the same time, even if you had this data, and even if you had all the infrastructure, and even if we had all the methodologies, then still it's very hard to understand what's going on. What I find so interesting right now at all the current developments is that my former field of psycholinguistics seems to become more and more relevant in this day and age because we have these huge models, this generative AI, and they seem to become more and more like a study object, like the human brain, that we don't really seem to understand. And we know a bit more about generative AI and about the things that are going on there because we designed it. But at the same time, there's so many emergent phenomena in there, and we don't really understand why they emerge and how they emerge, and how the data that goes in influences the output of these models. So in order to study that, we could also look at all the methods that have been developed by cognitive scientists, basically. We need to start studying it as an object by itself, which also opens up lots of very interesting questions and opportunities. But in order to do so, it will be really beneficial if we do have access to the data, if we do have access to all the infrastructures, at least in order to be able to study it better. But we also need to ask ourselves, should it really be the role of academic researchers to check and evaluate what big tech is doing? Should that really be their role? Or should we really focus on having researchers take their main role of being curious about the world and expanding knowledge horizons and performing lots of fundamental research, and then have supervisory authorities and contract researchers, and then, for example, the independent research institutes do all the evaluations and certifications of these models. So that's also a question that I would like to put on the table. Do we really think it should be academic researchers to do all the checks and the evaluations, and basically not be that free to determine what they are researching and what they are curious about? It also poses some fundamental questions, because otherwise you're just running behind what big tech is doing at the moment. And perhaps there should be a little bit more freedom in academic research, and perhaps we should rethink who should be the evaluator of these systems. Yeah, and there's many more things to say about large language models and all the European efforts and all the challenges that we're facing. And I think the main thing within Europe that we're struggling with is the wishes and the ethics and the values that we have, that on the one hand we want to be as transparent and open as possible, but at the same time comply with current legislation. So how do you make a fully transparent model where and a model that is as performant as possible, while also opening up the complete data set that might contain lots of personal information, that might contain lots of copyright materials. So we're struggling with that issue at the moment.
Thank you very much. And then, yeah, Oana, what do you think? Should researchers check on big tech? Do you see that as your role, and how does that relate to your role as an independent researcher?
I think that it doesn't need to be the role of all researchers, but I do think there are researchers that are interested in this. I know that there are people in computer science that would like to understand what is the role of algorithms in spreading misinformation or amplifying some unhealthy behaviors, and there are social scientists and political scientists that also want to study many concepts. So I do think there is a big community that wants to understand what are the risks with online platforms and whether we can design better, safer technology.
And so then let me ask you, you are a very successful scientist, you're tenured, you're doing great stuff, you've done a lot of work on checking risks and also compliance. Can you publish on compliance research?
Yes. I mean, I'm a security and privacy researcher, and whenever we are showing a problem with a system, I mean, typically it was, your email spam filter, it's not good in the previous years. But now when we are showing, look, the transparency mechanisms that are put in place by these online platforms are not good enough. Look, their algorithms are able to allow targeting of minor children. When we are showing this kind of new risks, the community, it was not the case at the beginning, but the computer science community has opened their eyes, and they are very welcome to this kind of research and this kind of interdisciplinary research. And we have a recent paper published at the top computer science conference where we are looking at whether it is possible to market to children online. And we have both a perspective, technical perspective, is it feasible? I mean, can you go and advertise, and does the platform send the ads to children? And also we have an analysis on the legal, what are the legal limits on this. So people ask, were you able to publish this at the computer science conference? And it was published. So
I think that is very encouraging to hear. And I know a lot of young researchers who are actually concerned about to what extent this can be.
First conference that they sent, they said, no, I understood the legal text bad and I'm not right, but I did it with a legal scholar, so she did everything, so they were wrong, people that were reviewing the paper. But the second time around, we ended up on better reviewers.
And how far do you see really your role going? So imagine you find out there is unfair ad targeting going on, and that is your result, you publish on that, and then what?
So I'm trying to lobby for better protection laws. So what is happening for advertising to children? So the DSA is forbidding advertising to children through profiling. But what is actually happening on YouTube is that advertisers are allowed to place their ad on a single piece of content. Like I can say, I want my ad to only be shown on this particular video on YouTube. Yes, this is like placement-based advertising. It's a form of contextual advertising. It doesn't need to profile the user. You don't need to track their activity. But it's a very fine form of micro-targeting. Yeah, you can target people that are watching a cartoon video, so you can reach children. And then you can also target people that are interested in some alternative medicine, maybe with some other products. So what I'm trying to show that this ad technology has a feature that I think lawmakers didn't realize that exist, that we can target at this fine granularity, and that we need new laws, at least in the context of children, to protect them, because now it's very easy to simply market to children, and it's legally allowed both in the US and in Europe. And we have no transparency. We have no idea what are the ads that are targeted at videos that are watched for children. And this is very problematic because you can only place it on one video. It's only 100 or 1,000 children that are seeing it. You don't have any accountability. We don't have ad library for this. So I'm trying to come here saying, look, this is a technical possibility. There are no legal safeguards. Maybe we want to do something new in the future. So that's why I'm here.
Bravo to that. So you go also to policymakers and present your research and do what? Give them policy recommendations?
Yes. This is what I learned. Policymakers, they want evidence and they want clear recommendations. So what I'm trying to do, to pair them though. This is the evidence, this is what I'm recommending. Like in the past, evidence. Political ad libraries don't contain miss half of the political ads in Brazil during presidential election. We need ad libraries that contain all the ads. So this pairing seems to work very well, like showing evidence and being clear of what we want. Another thing that we realize, and I think it's very important, is that what kind of data we need to detect malicious actors. Yeah, so we have access to ad libraries, but out of these millions of ads, how do we take the ones that are trying to manipulate? How do we identify Cambridge Analytica? How do we identify some Russian interference? And here, again, technologists are able to look at data. What happened? What we did is that we looked at a campaign done by the Russian Internet Research Agency in 2016, and we realized that the click-through rate was much higher for their ads. So what we say, we need click-through rate, yeah? How many people see the ad and how many people click as a filter to understand what are the ads that are more impactful. And out of them, then we are going to be able to better analyze them. But without having filters on malicious behavior, we are faced with the reverse problem. We have too much data, and we don't know how to pick the important examples.
Which relates also a bit to Saskia's point that we also need new methods. But let me push you a bit more on that, because so everybody who has done policy work, and I think Matthias knows everything about that, knows also how much time that is and how much endless meetings in windowless rooms with very bad coffee, unpaid and so far. So it's very, very time consuming. So do you feel that universities prepare their researchers sufficiently for that? And actually, would you advise young, untenured colleagues to invest all this time in translating their research for policymakers?
So it does take a lot of time, but it's also a team effort when you pair with organizations such as Algorithmic Watch. You can bring something and they can explode it. Yeah, so they have a big network. You need this collaboration, because alone I would not ever be able to talk with everyone. So you need to team up. Regarding whether universities are prepared, I think that they are totally unprepared. This is not a typical computer science field. And people have a hard time understanding. They are always telling me, are you doing social sciences? Are you doing computer sciences? And we don't care. This is an important problem that needs to be addressed. It needs both perspectives, social science and computer science. So I don't understand why is this question relevant. So there is a need to teach also, at least in the computer science field, the importance of doing this. Interdisciplinarity is good in theory. It's hard in practice.
So there's work for universities.
There is work for universities, but recently there are two young researchers that got hired in France. That they came to me, they're saying, "Look, we are doing this theoretical work, but we read your papers and we really want to do more of this measurement stuff and have an impact on law. What can we do?" So at least there is interest from particular researchers.
Thank you very much. Matthias, you have apparently access to data very soon, and I think that is a proper reward for all the hard work you put into Article 40. But this access is bought at a steep cost because there are now high expectations towards Algorithm Watch and more generally researchers and civil society to fulfill all kind of roles, as we heard, as I tried to explain in the introduction. So, can you live up to that role, and do you feel that the law and policy equip you sufficiently to play that role?
One of the most important questions is, do our funders equip us to live up to that role? So maybe I can ask you to write a statement and I bring it to the organizations that give us the money, or are supposed to. But no, I mean, leaving that aside, yeah, that's the big question. I mean, I just loved everything I heard just from Juana, because this is the spirit that we like to see in academia, and we never had a lack of colleagues, of researchers to work with. You know, there was never the problem for us to find people who are interested in these topics and who would say, yeah, we would also collaborate with the civil society organization. And now, yeah, as you said, Natalie, of course, you're entirely correct. There is this ton of expectations, and, you know, the one answer is, no, we will never be able to live up to these expectations if you phrase them in the sense that, okay, now academia and civil society are going to do the enforcement and oversight of the platforms under the DSA or whatever. You know, it's not going to work. But can we play an important role in that? We certainly hope so. I mean, that's why we are there, and that's what our ambition is. And I think we need to be clear about how to collaborate with the existing structures. And I mean, I'm just really in this good position here at the moment to say that there is things are moving in a direction that we like. So I already said we launched this data access request. Now the reaction to that was, and I need to also remind myself that I don't use all this jargon all the time, so I think I refer to the DSC, and that is the Digital Services Coordinator. That's the structure of the in the nation states, in the member states of the EU, the enforcers of the DSA, and they are responsible for the platforms that have their headquarters there. So for example, in Germany, there are very few of those. It's only, at the moment, it's only an e-commerce platform that is sort of regulated or overseen by the German DSC. But we have the possibility to work with the German DSC that then, for example, vets us as researchers and then also makes a recommendation to the Irish DSC, who is then responsible for Microsoft. So we try to use this structure to make our access request more, you know, powerful. And what happened then was that they said, you know, we can't do anything at the moment. Both the German and the Irish DSC said that because we need to wait for the so-called delegated act. So the European Commission now needs to provide a delegated act that spells out a little better how these data access requests need to work and what the structure is and so on and so forth. So this is not all in the law, and the delegated act will come out probably in the fall. But the European elections are next month, right? So we said, this is bad, you know. We should have had this option a lot earlier. So this is how we then try to increase the pressure. We also sent the data access request directly to Microsoft. They said, yeah, you know, we only want to comply within the what the DSA says. But here, fortunately, the European Commission had already published some guidelines for very large online platforms and search engines for elections. And they said, we encourage you to work with researchers on a voluntary basis, right? So of course we are pointing to that and say, hey, Microsoft, you know, the Commission said work with us on a voluntary basis. Don't wait for the delegated act. Don't wait for the DSCs to become active. And we are in talks with them. And what happened now is that in the meantime, last week, the Commission announced that they it's not really a formal investigation that they launched, but they are asking for information from Microsoft. And they are asking specifically about information from Microsoft about election-related systemic risks. That systemic risk thing, we haven't touched on that, is sort of the framework that is also in this DSA, where they say, you know, we need to find out whether there are systemic risks that emanate from these platforms and what their platforms do to mitigate those. Why systemic risks and what are they? Second question I'm not going to try to answer, because this is what we are going to talk about for the next couple of years. But they, you know, wouldn't, for example, want to say any kind of risk, because that would be too broad. So we are making the argument that these risks are systemic, for example, when they are about the integrity of elections. You need to have factual information available, and when you have a company like Microsoft that produces a system that they market with millions and millions of euros to everyone as, you know, really this most powerful information tool in the world, and it spits out, or a third of the answers that it spits out are either incorrect or misleading, then we say this certainly looks like a systemic risk to us. And we also make the argument that the data that we need to find out what they are trying to do about this are, for example, not personalized data. So we do not ask for any GDPR-related data, which makes it, of course, a lot easier for us to be able to have the infrastructure available, because otherwise the threshold would be so high, first of all legally, but then also when it comes to data protection and data security, you know, that it would become problematic for us. But we can do these things. And I interrupted myself, but last week the Commission started this you know, preliminary phase of an investigation. And of course, we are very, very happy to see this. And this is, I think, how it can work, you know, in a combination of research and advocacy, pointing to the flaws and the gaps, and then let the Commission and the DSCs do their work. Will this change the world and how platforms work? Ask me in 10 years from now, right? But at least we are doing what we can.
That's really interesting, and I come to that dialogue back in a second. But first of all, essentially what you said is it's the German and the Irish regulator who vets you and other academics and decide whether you get access or not. Is that okay, or should we be concerned?
Again, we'll find out, because the process for us hasn't started, because the Delegated Act is not there, so they do not even answer in a formal sense, saying, okay, so we accept you as a vetted research organization, as an eligible organization that can ask for this data. We don't have this answer yet. We are very optimistic, but it's complicated, because my take on this is that it will depend also on, again, member state laws. Why? Because what is a research organization in a certain country differs from country to country. So there is this idea that they would take a provision from the copyright directive to understand a little better what really is a research organization, but it has a lot to do. For example, in our specific case, we are a non-profit under German law, and we have a certain list of purposes as this non-profit organization. We had a different case where we had already assessed this by a lawyer in Germany. For example, do we qualify under the GDPR for the research privilege there when it comes to private data? And they said, yes, you do, right? So of course we are going to use this to also make the case to the DSC. But I think the question that you're asking is it okay that they vet us? And my answer to that is, I think there needs to be a structure. Because the reason why the Commission did this is that you can certainly easily imagine lots of problematic organizations that would just ask for research for reasons that we would also not agree with, for commercial reasons, for reasons to better understand how, for example, the security measures of the platforms work and how to undermine them, you know, how to game the system and the algorithm itself. So I think there are lots of problematic reasons why you could ask for research. So I do think that there is a good reason to have this. Now, is it going to work? We'll see.
Yeah. Thank you also thinking, giving me a key for my next question to Sven, actually. Because actually, Matthias, you said that actually you really believe in a dialogue also with the Commission, and that outside of the laws, their policymakers could actually do a lot to hold the back of researchers and reinforce their position. And it was also interesting, there was a recent, I think the Commission also announced an investigation to look into the terms of use of TikTok and to what extent they bear researchers. But Sven, you are actually at this interesting spot between research and the Commission. So what do you see moving forward for the GRC role to play here? How do you position yourself in this field between policy and also Saskia's remark that actually researchers should do academic research, but also Anna's and Matthias' story that researchers also should advise policy, and how will you help them?
Excellent, thanks. Indeed, just also to react to a bit what has been just said, no, I think it's exactly that we are in a need of these governance structures and understanding which kind of processes we need to actually at the end govern AI also at a global level. So we are in this process and we are in a learning phase, that's for sure. So we do have a few processes and structures in place that we can work with. And I think there also with the structures we have at the JRC, at the Science for Policy interface, we can certainly help on taking on scientific evidence and providing scientific advice to policy making. And as said before, this is happening also in close collaboration with researchers around Europe or also worldwide. So we see us very much in this interface and helping in the transitioning of evidence and policy recommendations to the colleagues in other parts of the Commission. But also there we have to learn how to work and what are the different roles of academic researchers and of others. And one of the things we didn't touch too much upon yet is, you mentioned multidisciplinary research, but also to unpack a bit, if we talk about the researcher, what is this person actually? So are we talking about people in academia? Is this computer science? Is this legal scholars? Is it more colleagues from the social sciences looking at societal impact of technology? I think there is a lot to still unpack to understand which kind of structures you need. What we do internally, like in my team, for example, we have a mix of computer scientists, people with a more legal background in social science, so we try to create this multidisciplinary team at the Science for Policy interface, and with this we can also help other researchers which may come from a team that is more focused on computer science or on the social impacts to help with this interface and make the connections. So this is as much as I want to say on that for now, not to take too much time, but I think at the end we are here in a natural evolution. No? We always had science supporting public governance since ages. If you look at environmental policies, for example, a lot happened in the past also on monitoring and compliance assurance and complaints, and we are now in a phase where we have so much digital change happening that we now are at this tipping point to have also a stronger engagement of scientists and researchers in, for example, the use of AI and the governance of AI. So that's maybe a first reaction to what you said.
And there was in the panel already some discussion about academic curiosity-driven research, but also policy. Matthias was happy that scientists finally also sign petitions and so far. And the regulatory framework really foresees a very close collaboration between academics and policymakers. So when do researchers stop being independent researchers?
I think they shouldn't, right? I mean, at the end, I think what's coming now with the regulations on DMA, DSA, and the AI Act is that we actually have these connection points and also a reason to interact even more formally. I mean, you may argue if it's needed or not, if it's a pity that it's needed because it should be the way that researchers are also contributing to society. But at the end, it will always be this independent, critical view from research and raising the red flags and mentioning the issues, like the example you gave before, to really show where the real issues are and ensure that the regulators are having this evidence available, but also recommendations that they can act upon. So I would not say that there is really a loss of independence. There is a new channel to actually provide input also in a more structured way, let's say. So I think it's part of this rule set how to interact and really do this governance, and we still have to experiment more and understand what the exact roles will be. But I think the overall framework is starting to get into an interesting shape.
I think Juan has something to say. Yes.
Yes. So we discussed a lot about the role of researchers in discovering and measuring systemic risks, but which could be seen as not independent because it kind of pinpoints negative things with online platforms. But researchers can also look at the other way around. For example, there was a discussion about regulating, forbidding micro-targeting, not only for political ads, but for all the ads in general. And there were privacy advocates that were advocating about this, but there was a lack of research on what would be the economic impact on the system. And I do think, and the problem is that we didn't have access to data, so we managed to find these crazy measurement methodologies that we gather like 60,000 advertisers on Facebook and match them with their LinkedIn profile, and we were able to see that 70% of advertisers on Facebook were indeed small and medium sized businesses, and we also looked to which extent they are using micro-targeting as a way to reach customers. So, and the overall result was, yes, it will impact small and medium-sized businesses more than big companies. So we need to pay attention in adding new rules. So researchers can also, they can work on both sides. Both sides are interesting. What is the impact of regulation? What new regulations we need? When are these regulations maybe too strict? It's not, but we don't need to play aside.
Let me challenge you both a bit on that. So if the DSA tells us, okay, yes, you get access to data, but only if you do research on these and these and these topics, is that a problem for our independence?
I think, from my perspective, it's something that we didn't have, and this is an opportunity, even if it's constrained. And what we need to also make sure is that researchers have safe harbor in order to scrape data, because this won't be the only way that researchers will get access to data. They can still use data donations and scraping. So we need to make sure that they are not going to be pursued in justice because they are scraping this data, because this will allow to ask other questions that are not covered by the systemic risks in the Digital Services Act.
Yeah. I saw that Saskia also wanted to respond.
And maybe also try, because you were challenging also, because indeed, I think at the end, it's also targeted research in that sense. No, it's not basically allowing researchers to do whatever with whatever business data they can get a handle on. So there need to be also safeguards towards not only citizens but also to businesses to actually be more concrete of what data can really be used for, no? And also protecting then competition and what have you. So I would really say that it's not really, is it still academic research if you reply to this kind of request? Maybe ask it that way.
Saskia.
Yeah, I haven't heard this hip word ecosystem yet. And I think that's a crucial point here, because right now, indeed, there is a big role for research and academic researchers, but at the same time, you cannot do it all. You cannot lobby and do academic research and fundamental research and develop new methodologies and teach, and at the same time also have this idea of what's happening in the outside world. You need civil society organizations that connect to all the human rights issues and also see who is affected by what types of regulations. At the same time, as researchers, we're very much in an ivory tower. Do we really know what's happening in business? Do we really know what's happening at small and medium enterprises? Not really. We don't really have that good connection with it. And as an RTO, there is a little bit more collaboration with industry. So we know a little bit better what's happening there, but still there is some distance. So in the end, we need to work together to also see the good sides of what platforms are doing and to also understand what would be the potential impact if we limit certain activities. So I think that's a very good point that Luana raised there. But in the end, we shouldn't expect academic researchers to do it all and also not try to do it all. Really need to work together, really delegate, and really have these orchestrating entities look at what do you need in this ecosystem and who are the types of organizations that can take those roles. And I think that's also a very important role that Sven could take, for example. Here, first of all, even if you're an independent research organization and you do a lot of contract research, so you are very suited to do all kinds of evaluations, for example, still, if we don't have any budgets, it's not going to fly. So, first of all, there needs to be some budget allocated to actually do the types of research and evaluation and checking that we all deem necessary. But in order to make that happen, it should be put on the agenda. There should be awareness raised. We need to know about all the issues that are out there for civil society, for small and medium businesses, for small and medium business enterprises. We need to know what's happening for the large corporations, etc. So we need all these kinds of signals, and we need to work together. And there is already a lot of public-private partnerships going on. We have the ELSA labs, for example, so the ethical, legal, societal, and AI labs. What's the A?
Ethical legal societal. Yeah.
Indeed. So there's already some first steps to try to make that happen. But I think we should really refrain from trying to do it all. And take all roles at the same time.
Which is also a concern also for a lot of young researchers, that the list of what they have to perform is getting longer and longer, raising. Very briefly, because...
Just a very quick add-on to what you were just saying. We also have to see the role of science and research in a time horizon. So, for example, as mentioned before, some of the methodologies for these kind of checks are not known. So there is a lot about request or requirement for research to identify these methodologies and really test them, improve them, and provide guidelines how to use the methodologies. But once they're in place, they may be then contracted out and run by others.
Yeah. That's also maybe the horizon dimension of the funding. That a lot of funding is very short term, and a lot of these projects take a lot of time. Yeah.
It's also more research funding as compared to more operational funding, if you want to call it so.
Yeah. Saskia, you already mentioned ecosystems. There was a recent Washington Post article describing how AI companies are draining academia for talent and also increasingly compete with researchers. And we see indeed on computer science conferences, there are more and more actually industry researchers instead of academic researchers. So, how do you see that? Do you think these concerns are justified?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot, and it's a difficult question because, yes, of course, lots of talent is going to big corporations because they have a lot of opportunities there and a lot of, there's higher salaries, there's more job perspectives. And then we can indeed, on the one hand, say that's a really bad thing and we're losing talent. At the same time, we can ask ourselves, do we really think, if we really think it's worthwhile to have more researchers stay in academia, then we might need to rethink a little bit the perspectives that academia can offer to young researchers. Because before you get to a tenure position, that's a tough one. I think most researchers can attest to that. It's not so easy. And it's the publish or perish, and people are working really long hours, and it's a tough lifestyle, and people have to move around, etc. So I do think if you want to keep more talent inside, then you also need to make sure that the talent also feels welcome and has a perspective. So I think there's also something about academia that makes it hard to stay. So we should not only be critical towards industry, like, they're paying too much, and their lunches are too nice. Perhaps we need to rethink a little bit what academia looks like, and also make it a bit more attractive to keep the talent. And at the same time, it makes sense that people go back and forth, but we should also not condemn individuals who go to industry. And kind of feel like that they are losing their integrity. Because in the end, it would be really nice if people flow back and forth. So it could be that you move to industry and then after a while decide that you would like to have a bit more academic freedom and pursue your own interests a little bit more and then move back to academia. And that does not happen that often.
Fair point. You are actually behind the Dutch language model, and we heard a lot already about researchers need access to language models. There was also an open letter of 100 plus artificial intelligence researchers complaining that, for example, companies such as OpenAI do not give access or under very restricted terms. Will GPT-NL do that differently?
Oh yeah, that's the golden question indeed. And we started off, when we started to write down this proposal and think about it, we said we want to have this open, sovereign, trustworthy, ethical model. And then you start to think about what that means and what that implies. And it seems to kind of run counter. It doesn't seem to be possible to be completely open, have a very good performant model, and also at the same time be trustworthy and lawful. Because, for example, if you want to have a very performant model, you need lots of data, and that data will definitely have to contain copyrighted material. And you can, of course, talk to data holders and make all kinds of deals regarding the data. But that also implies that probably parts of the data will not be publicly accessible. So you do have to make certain choices along the way. Ask yourself, so is it more important that we have data that is 100% transparent and open to everyone, or should we go for a model that's really performant such that we actually have a European alternative, a sovereign alternative? And that's a question we've been struggling with a lot. At the same time, we really want to push for, and this is something that we still need to look into, push for access by request of the full data set. And I am no legal expert, so it's just a dream. But it would be great if, because we understand we cannot open up the full data set to the general public, have a downloadable link and say, well, here's our data set, but we're doing it in a lawful way. So we don't scrape any internet data, but here is our data. I mean, that kind of runs counter to the whole idea that we want to do it while not breaking the law, which seems kind of ridiculous that we have to put it out there as explicitly, but that's what's going on right now. Many initiatives say that they cannot make any performant generative AI without breaking the law. Well, okay, let's try if we can. But it would be great if the whole data set that we have is accessible upon request. And this is why I also asked Matthias, so hey, there's something about this Article 40 in the DSA. What's that exactly? Because we are aware there are some exceptions, there are some ways, but it's really hard to think about what that would look like and how we can realize that. And what are the legal boundaries? I have no idea. So in the end, you need lots of expertise and ideas, and it is hard to get it off the ground. It is difficult and complicated, but we want it.
You're sitting in a room that is pretty full of lawyers and scholars, I think.
Help us.
So if anyone has a good idea. I see one there.
Can you wait for the microphone, because this is also recorded, otherwise I won't hear your question.
So, Andrew Adams from Meiji University in Tokyo. The very simple, very short answer is you can look at the existing work on open data generally, and there are issues there, but the first thing is you tell people what data you used. You don't necessarily have to give them access to all of the data, but if you use this book, and this book, and this book, you don't need to give them access to those books, because they can then negotiate their own access. That's the prerequisite, is they need to know which books were in there. And then if they want to replicate what you did, depending on the status of the replication, is either that's within your deal with the publisher, and you can share it with them to replicate, but not necessarily publish their replication because they're checking it. Or if they want to publish a rival with some tweaks to it, then they have to do the same negotiations you did. But at least you've published what you used. And that's the core thing, is when people know what you used, that's the minimum transparency you need to go for.
Yeah, that's a great reaction, and thanks for that, indeed. Well, that's the minimum we also want to do. Make sure we describe the contents of the data set. So have data sheets for data sets. There's this whole framework and ideas out there how you describe the metadata of your data sets at least, so that people indeed know, okay, so this and these books went in, this is where I can go to negotiate it. But then the question is, how feasible is that for researchers to do that? That's just a practical question. And another one, there is a lot of generative AI out there right now that is completely open, including the data sets. We know exactly what data goes in there. You can even download the full data set right now. So how do you look at that? Because there is a lot of open material out there. The open source community is developing really rapidly and doing great research, also in benchmarking and evaluating these models. So there's lots of methodologies out there. So if we have all these open data sets, how necessary is it still to have access to every single data set out there and all the proprietary data sets if we already have this huge pile? Literally, the data sets are called the pile, one of those. You can download them, and you can inspect them already today.
A lot of really good questions. I'm looking into the audience. If you also question, Mirko?
Well, thank you. Thank you for this panel. My name is Mirko Tobias Schäfer. I run the Utrecht Data School, and we are usually working with external partners. So I'm really interested in the take of this panel in what I encounter as the biggest obstacles to role of research and researchers in AI governance, and that is that many of our colleagues are studying the phenomenon from afar, not from up close. And that the incentive structure in the university is actually stifling any attempt to do so, as you have to publish mostly in academic venues, mostly within your peer group, which already stifles interdisciplinary and often transdisciplinary work, and that universities structurally do not have the support infrastructure for actually enabling researchers to do so, starting with a lack of legal support, continuing with a complete lack of administrative support that is needed for this kind of projects, and also missing incentives for researchers to do so. But also, what would your PhD students do, Natalie, if they are interdisciplinarily trained and supervised? Where do you see their careers going afterwards? And last but not least, what are the rules of engagement? I hear that WANA is advising policy, but under which pretext? What are the rules of your engagement? Who signed up these rules? Do you do that yourself? Is there some peer review? Is there some accountability? These are things I'm interested in.
Anna, you want to respond?
I will take the last question. Look, this is my own perspective, and what I'm saying is if they hear it from 3 different places means that maybe they should consider it. So whenever I'm going and talking with a policymaker, I'm having the list of all the things that I think that they are good, but in no way I'm saying this is, I'm providing evidence for the things that I'm saying that they are good, but in no respect I'm claiming to be something that everyone agrees on. I trust them that they will hear from multiple people and things that they hear repeatedly. They will hear them more.
But do you reflect your role as a researcher in and how you change from an epistemically interested person into someone who's prescribing something? Are you a science arbiter or are you an issue advocate? Do you have any framework where you move in, where you rethink your role?
That's a good question. I did not have a framework. I felt like we have a problem, and this is how I know I can contribute to my best of my knowledge to it, but I don't have such framework on this.
Yes, but I think I'm not sure what the rules for panels are and asking questions to the moderators, but but I think it is a fair point that so far we've been talking a lot how policy can encourage and support research, but I think another really important topic to put on the agenda is how universities can make sure that the incentive structures are there, and hence also my questions about tenure and career requirements. The system also needs to grow, and so everybody here who is any committees at universities that are relevant, make your voice heard. We need more support for researchers who do policy work and acknowledge that in a good, proper way. You are in such a position and want to make an argument. Can we have the microphone? the gentleman to the front.
Hi, Mark Dempsey, Article 19. Thanks very much for this panel. I have plenty of questions, but Matthias, just as a matter of interest, how did you decide to go for Microsoft when you went via the Irish DSC to be a vetted researcher? What was the process to make that decision?
What our process was to make the decision.
You decided for Microsoft above.
Oh, okay. That was easy because last year, I mean, easy in the sense that last year we wanted to check the impact of large language models and generative AI, and basically at that time in Germany, the only available service was Microsoft's Bing Chat, now Copilot. So Gemini wasn't available, and we decided to look at that. And that basically gave us the evidence to base then our data access request on. So there was no strategic thinking behind it, except that it needed to be a very large online platform or very large online search engine that has to do something with the structuring of public debate. So we are not really interested in, for example, asking Zalando, how they structure their e-commerce system, because this is not what we're doing. Yeah. And
Sven, you also wanted to respond?
Yeah, just a reaction to the question before, maybe two. I think one topic we didn't discuss is also the role of academia in the governance of AI in science, which is yet a completely different topic, but also there you come with all these questions of the capacity and what is really the culture in universities support also their researchers in doing responsible use or using AI responsibly, what are the infrastructures they use, what are the administrative support. I think there is also something which is an extremely debated field at the moment, also to see how publishers are actually requesting proof, et cetera, et cetera. And that may be, that discussion, I'm mentioning it here, because this may also change the mindsets of universities towards contribution to governance of AI in general, not only AI in science. So there is potentially a path which will take some time, and it's a fascinating discussion anyway. Yeah. The second point I wanted to say, just from the other side experience, what we very often also see from colleagues in the Commission which are more working on the policy files, they are also very cautious about exactly some researcher coming and giving scientific advice. They always have this flag of advocacy, no? So it's a natural selection of any policymaker to really be approached by a scientist, also being cautious if this is really evidence and the right recommendation to follow. So I think it's always good to take this as an input, but of course there are also processes on the policy-making side on some forms of review and asking additional opinions.
Thank you. I saw a question up there. Are your hands still up? No. Okay, so my sense of geography is wrong. Margot?
Hello, I'm Margot Kaminsky from the University of Colorado and currently a fellow at the UI. My question is, a lot of this conversation has been about expert roles in tripartism, so expertise in overseeing both the algorithmic systems and systems of governance of algorithmic systems, but there hasn't been much conversation about democratic tripartism. So to make that into like non-jargon, my question is, to what extent are both researchers and policymakers thinking about how to take their privileged access to governance of AI systems and information flows and operationalize those for effective governance by, say, impacted stakeholders who are actually on the ground impacted by these systems but don't have the technical resources to be involved in such governance?
Anyone who, Matthias?
Yeah, actually, I would like to take that question, although I'm not a regulator or an enforcer, but I think this is a very, very important question. But the DSA has already addressed this in the sense that it says that there needs to be stakeholder engagement. But what this looks like, the stakeholder engagement, is still an open question, the same way that, what a systemic risk is an open question and so on. So this will also be a process to get there. We have published a paper that we call the 5 E's framework, where we say, there need to be a certain number of requirements met for stakeholder engagement to really be legitimate and relevant stakeholder engagement instead of just, for example, these fake engagements where you say, so we have a public consultation and you already know that the only ones who will be able to participate in this public consultation are the experts because they have the expertise on the one hand, but also the resources on the other hand to answer these very long questionnaires. Mm-hmm. So we are at the same time advocating for really making this a let's say, equitable process where stakeholders are asked for their input who are members of these affected communities. Again, we need to see how this goes. It's going to be a struggle.
Very good point. Yeah.
Also, to quickly react to that, it's a very valid point that you're raising here, and I think it's a very important one, because in the end, if I'm a small business owner, Andrew Ng gave this example, democratizing AI and machine learning kind of implies that it's very easily usable by a large group of people. And in the end, if I'm a small business owner without a PhD in computer science, I'm never going to be able to develop my own AI solution. I'm just going to take something that is easy to use and cheap, because I need to survive if I have my own small store or whatever. So in the end, we can raise a lot of issues, but we also need to be aware that for most business owners, it is really a matter of surviving and trying to stay competitive. And if there's no viable alternative, then we do have a problem. So it is important to raise issues, but it's also important to realize that for most people that use these technologies, there's nothing actionable in there. There's nothing really they can do about it. And at the same time, also, I think it's important to realize that we oftentimes only hear the voices of the majority of the privileged. We don't really hear a lot of the voices of underrepresented groups that are affected by these technologies or that are interested in using these technologies but cannot. I mean, if you look at speech technology, that's a clear example there. It really helps if you have a very nice, clear accent, but it doesn't really help you if you have a strongly accented speech, or if you stutter, or if you speak a understudied language. I mean, things are improving, but we also need to consider these underrepresented groups. And that's been an issue that's on the radar for a long, long time, but we don't really seem to get around that.
Very important points, and I think there are many more questions, and that was also why this panel was conceptualized as a kickoff of, and I hope we will continue those in other forms. The next panel is actually pushing against the door, so I think we need to vacate this room. I would like to ask you to give a huge applause for the panel.